Whenever things like Next Fest used to happen, I'd usually just pick the demos that really absolutely 100,000% interested me. Now that I'm taking my content creation a lot more seriously, I thought I'd challenge myself to really try out the games that I usually won't ever bother with. In this video, I'll share the 24 new games that I discovered from Next Fest of October 2025, and actually tested like all of those like I do my demo reviews. I'll help you discover new games that might interest you by giving you a basic overview of what it is and how it plays, followed by the good, the bad, and how the devs can even improve all of these games because all of these are work in progress. It used to be 26, but sadly I just couldn't get a couple of these to work. I'll go through each of these games in order of my playing them, and then at the very end I'll rank all of these in a tier list thing so that you'll know where I rank all of these next to each other. This will be the first of two parts, so sit back, use the timestamps if you want to skip over to the next one, and enjoy my top 24 picks from this round of Steam's Next Fest. I already covered this in the full review before I decided to do this condensed video, so if you want to check that out, link in the description below. But basically I love hot rods and I love rally games. Under normal circumstances this should be a slam dunk for Rusty Road Racing for me, but unfortunately this is one small tweak away from greatness: the driving physics. Simply put, these older cars tend to suffer from a lot of oversteer because of their weight and older suspension designs. However, where the game truly lacks is in having next to no grip in this current version. If they tweak it to have a bit more grip while having that oversteer and the dirt drifting, I think it would play a lot better than it does, which overall it really is a good game. And I'm hoping for that because even though I'm not too big on racing games, I do have my occasional laps here and there, and this to me has some decent potential. I think I said it best in my playthrough that I don't really understand this game, but I respect it. In Bleu Bayou you play as a crawfish who throws a machete and has a harpoon that latches onto things for a different kind of attack, and your mission is to pay back debt. That's it. It makes no sense, it's hilarious, and I like it like that. Plus everything plays like a Game Boy Color game, but with the higher resolution and better animations of a Game Boy Advance game, except it's built in the 2020s, so it feels retro, but plays modern and has that smoothness, in case that makes any sense. And this game has lots of zany characters that are so ridiculous, you just buy into that world. Again, I don't really understand any of it. In my heart's heart, I know that this isn't for me, mostly, but I respect it. And even though I would never consider this game when I'm playing on my PC, when I could literally play anything else other than a glorified Game Boy game, which I say affectionately, I grew up on the Game Boy Color, I can see this having a better shot as a handheld game, or even like if it was ported over to Android or iOS, because I can see myself playing this game more on my phone or on my Retroid Pocket Flip 2. Finch Archie is a game that disappointed me, not because I played it and it was bad, but because I wanted to play it but I just couldn't, since it's a co-op only game. This one was a bummer because the premise is very interesting. You're a human and your partner is a dog. As a human, you can access certain clues and details, and it's the same deal when you're a dog. To be fair to the game, it did say that it was co-op in the tags and in the description. I just either didn't see that, or I assumed that, like most co-op games, you could just at least try it out solo or something, and you could literally access the game like that. Given that I do have friends, but none of them like detective games like these, I'm just gonna have to find someone to do a let's play or something in the future for me to check this game out. Unless again they fix it and make it solo playing a thing. Feed My Mech completely caught me off guard because of how well this game surprisingly works in ways that you wouldn't imagine it would. This is a point and click mech game where it feels like those old DOS or Windows 95 or Five Nights at Freddy's point and click games, but the whole time you're inside a mech. Somehow this combination all works for Feed My Mech, because while the point and click controls might take some time to get used to, once you do get into that rhythm and you're actually piloting the mech with just clicking it, it will start just, clicking in. At first it might feel like you're piloting a drone because point and click games just make you feel detached from the world because of that format, but because you're actually in a fully 3D rendered environment, you're moving around in a 3D map and you can only interact and see that map through the lens of the CRT retro analog technology of that world. That kind of tech that would feel so at home if it happened to have logos of companies like Weyland-Yutani or like Itzen and X-Wing, especially when the horror part comes in. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, this is a horror game. That combination of the sense of being trapped in a metal husk, isolated from everything, and you only have manual analog controls to get you out of your whole situation. All of that elevates the horror of this game far higher than it should be, because while Five Nights was made with cutscenes that may jump scare you occasionally but wouldn't necessarily terrify you, this one actually might when you realize that you're actually inside that world, and your only ways of interacting with it is through point and clicking. I wanted to like Don't Look so much because I thought it had an amazing premise. What if horror walking simulator, but you're blind? Well, you're not actually blind, you just can't open your eyes, kind of blind. Your mission is to get out of a haunted house, and since there are monsters there that will kill you if you look at them, kind of like Bird Box I think, you have to do it with your eyes closed and need to perceive the world around you using sound and I'm guessing memory too, which it does well. The sound design and the placement of audio cues in this game is on point. What isn't on point is the fact that besides a really dark and blurry thing on your screen at all times, you really have no way of interacting with the world visually, because even if you can't show things visually, you can simulate blindness visually to someone using certain visual clues and mechanics, which was done amazingly and a lot better by the next game, It Consumes. It Consumes is an arena shooter roguelite where you're in a world of darkness and you're fighting demons using spells and magic and shit, and you need to use sound. Headphones is a must for this game since accurate spatial positioning will help you find the demons to kill, but don't worry since you could use pulse to sort of like sonar your enemies visually for a brief moment. You can see all of them and all the objects in front of you where you're at. The game does a blind and darkness part of the experience right, and visualizing, perceiving the world as a blind person or someone in the world of darkness is something that it does well. But the only thing I can complain about this is not the fact that it's an arena shooter roguelite or roguelike, which is far from the type of games that I prefer to play, though it's not really an issue for me. To me, the thing that's lacking here is the gunplay, or rather the spell play, since you're casting spells against these demons and not using guns. They need things to be more tactile, or for it to feel good when you're actually hitting something, or even just having any kind of recoil or additional effects to let you know whether visually or through sound that you're casting spells powerful enough to actually put down demons. But other than that, It Consumes is a good game to at least try out since it's easy to get into and it's an actual playable experience that's replayable even as a demo. 3,000 meters to whatever's up there is a mixed bag for me. On the one hand, this plays and feels like a Pico 8 game, but taken far beyond the limits of the 32 kilobyte memory cap that the platform has, which I like. But on the other hand, there are two major flaws that I think is holding this back from being something truly special. Probably even the next big thing. The goal of the game is simple: climb your way out of this chasm or valley thing. But what makes this challenging is the fact that you can't really control exactly where you're gonna jump to like most other platformers. Instead, only the strength of the jump is the only thing that you can control, which in turn determines the jump angle and recoil force that you're gonna experience after, since Isaac Newton. That in and of itself isn't the problem. The problem for me is the level design, and while you could just say skill issue and you'd probably be right, what this game lacks is certain leveling safety nets that make making a mistake way too punishing, way too quickly, way too fast. And it's going to take you a lot of time and trial and error before you can actually make it back to where you were before to correct it. And because that mistake you made isn't that fresh anymore, you're basically approaching that jump as if it was your first time again, and you're really not learning the jumping mechanics of this game better or quite well or as efficiently as you could be, making the overall experience of playing this game just painful and not really challenging, which I see this game to have. A lot of potential, but only if they fix the level design, especially when it's done in a way that teaches the platform mechanics in isolated parts first, before throwing you off in the actual game that punishes you for your stupid judgments and skill issues, but fairly. Moving on to something lighter, The Good Old Days is a great answer to the question of what if Metroidvania put your kids in the 1970s or 80s and you're not highly trained paladins or vampire hunters? That's pretty much what The Good Old Days is. That, and what if all of that was in a Sega Genesis, but more on that later. I'll start with the cons because there's more pros to this and I'd want to focus on those more. Cons. Controls and movement is pretty much it. If you look into the controller mapping, you'll see quite a few buttons unused. This means that certain controls tend to share certain buttons and it might end up confusing the game engine a lot more than it should, resulting in this other part, movement. Movement's a bit slow and kind of sluggish, which makes sense in this universe since you're kids and you're not really, again, super agile, super strong paladins or ninjas or vampire hunters. But other than that, you could get used to it if you played it a bit more. Pros: excellent premise, there's no real big bad or the world to save, you just have to pay up an exorbitant amount of debt, and raiding the sewers is the way to do it. Naturally, Metroidvania area locking is a good mechanic for thorough exploration, especially in how they gate skills in this game, which is by finding your friends and switching between them. The game is also time-bound, unlike other Metroidvanias, which may be a con to some people, but at least is accurate to the story it's trying to tell, which is fine 30k by the end of tonight. Overall, it has excellent vibes. The pixel art and the soundtrack really captures the Genesis vibes that when the full game drops and I actually get this, I don't think there's any other controller I'd like to play this with other than my 8-bit Doe M30, which really gives you that Sega Saturn, Sega Genesis type of feel. I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but that soundtrack in particular has this sort of cozy fuzziness that reminds me of just playing on the Genesis that we briefly had when I was a kid on like weekends or weekday afternoons, and you know, it basically, if you hear it, if you experience it, you know what I'm talking about. It gets to that close. Go ahead and try this demo. Kotama and Academy Citadel is another Metroidvania on this list that, if I were to really simplify it and boil it down, it's basically Genshin Impact but Metroidvania, or Metroidvania with anime waifus. And that's really it. Game of the Year material, honestly. I cannot comment much on the quality of the waifus just yet, because there's not a lot that's shown in this demo, but as a Metroidvania, this one gets platforming and combat right. But in my opinion, there's a certain airiness in the movement that A, works great in showing a certain gracefulness in the movement of your character, which is a female and an anime girl. And that's a definite pro when it comes to the platforming too, because you have a bit of airtime before you start coming down. And B, this may be a con when it comes to combat, because that extra airtime might take some time to get used to, but overall these controls are very smooth and responsive, and is one of the best pros of this demo, honestly. Story-wise and lore-wise and like mechanics-wise, I didn't really pay much attention to it, but it's a school, there's magical powers, teleportation, and also gang wars and robots, so that's that. Primal Echo is the type of game that would feel so home in the early to mid 2000s or as a Gmod game, but in a good way. Aesthetically, there's an interesting story behind this, because on the one hand you're a primitive caveman doing primitive caveman things, but you're also navigating through these broken down insane megastructures underground, and your goal is to crawl your way back out to the surface. Visually, it evokes the sense and the vibes of a lot of the early 2000s 3D PC games really well, or graphics card box art from that era, but in its current state it's really interesting, and it's only held back by the controls. The controls are janky, but they're janky controls done in the right way, of like that era. And the 3D platforming works for the most part, but when it gets bad, it gets super bad, especially with the wall jumps, which is hard to do in a 3D game, and that's why I think very few games actually do that well. But I can applaud the ambition of the devs on this one, especially with the consistency in tone and visuals that they're going for. I don't think the controls itself is a problem, because making it smoother would ruin the 2000 vibes that this game is aiming for, and I do think it might be more on fine-tuning the dimensions of the map and level design itself, so that the current platforming mechanics would work much better, be much more idiot-proof for people like myself. Overall, this is worth checking out, especially when the game menu brings you back to Half-Life 1 so well. I don't see a lot of games like Systemic War anymore, but when I do, I'm a happy man. It's basically World in Conflict meets Company of Heroes, but where World in Conflict has that strategic combined arms, more complete real-time tactics warfare side that Company of Heroes lacks, because that one's much more focused on direct squad-based combat, where smaller things like cover and concealment have a much bigger impact in how you win or lose games, and your infantry aren't just cannon fodder. That's a big sentence. Systemic War attempts to try and depict modern mechanized warfare complete with newer tech in electronic warfare that's seen in conflicts in Eastern Europe today, except maybe just lacking the drone warfare, which isn't included in the demo, and for the most part, I think it succeeds in portraying modern warfare. As with all RTT games, learning the UI is half the game, so while I found it difficult to navigate through it all in my first playthrough, A, it wasn't that difficult since I was just getting used to it, and B, you'll get used to it over time. What I didn't find here, and I'm not sure if it's going to be in the final game or not, is the use of hotkeys. I believe the actual commands your units have them, but going through the menu and requesting for new units should at least have them, or at least have a lot more hotkeys. That's how you play these games. Systemic War should have menu hotkeys. Other than that, it's decent. Walking sims generally get a bad rep in gaming, and I think that's fairly well deserved for the most part. but that's gonna be its own video. But I think the Berlin apartment is walking sims done right. For starters, because there's practically no gameplay and it's more of an interactive movie, the story and artistic design have to work overtime to make a good walking sim game work, which, what this demo shows us, is really promising. It does it really well. The art design is a sort of colorful, lowish poly, but detailed art style that's a lot like Firewatch, and it interprets the world that is showing quite accurately to the location that it's set in, but in the game's art style, that I think it kind of makes it sort of like impressionistic. I can't remember, I went to an all-boys high school, and when we had art history class, I would have probably paid more attention in that class if there were art chicks involved, but that's another story. Anyways, the story is a real thing that shines about the Berlin apartment. This game tells the story of this one apartment in Berlin and the lives of the people who lived in it across the different time periods in Berlin's long history. It's basically a love letter to the city of Berlin, and yes, it goes through that part of Germany's history. But the thing that I think makes this game great as a walking sim is that it treats the activities that you'll eventually do less as chores and more like mini games like Mario Where It Does. And to me, it's one element that still gives the player quite the cinematic experience that you're in for when you're playing walking sims, but it also adds a bit more engagement here and there that just isn't some platforming or press this button to proceed to the next level, which the Berlin apartment does have, but there's a lot more variety in terms of like the mini gaming. And it makes sense in the story, at least in this demo. Alright, and that is it for the first half of the 24 games I played in this round of Next Fest. I'm looking at the voiceover timestamps, and there's going to be a very long video if I don't break this up right now. The second part will be published soon. Hope you'll stick around for that, and if you're watching this in the future, links in the description below. Here's the first half of the tier list like I promised. That is it for me for now. I'm Inigo, signing off for now. Catch you in the next one. Bye.